Hi, this is Larry Wagner. This discussion today will be the first of a series of talks about God's design for relationships. Our first in the series is entitled Choosing God's Love or Plugs. So I'll be walking through 6 different stations in this particular diagram. So let's jump in with what I would call condition A, and that's God's original design for how He created. And you'll see or imagine, if you're listening to this, a circle with a smaller circle inside of it. That smaller circle is a representation of God's perfect love enveloping us as He designed for creation, for perfect love with each other, and most of all, perfect love with our Creator. And we read about this in the first 3 chapters of Genesis. God was showing as a Trinitarian God, Father, Son, and Spirit, creating in His image. We are designed for connection. We're designed for a relationship, and He designed it with perfect love. With creation, Adam and Eve were to be caretakers of paradise. They were to name the animals and just enjoy the beauty and everything that was there. Perfect love with each other. Can't imagine what it'd be like to be in a relationship where there is no sin. It's a perfect love. And then a perfect love with their Creator who came and walked in the cool of the day and fellowshiped with them. With that perfect love came the choice to choose to trust it or not. And as we know from the fall, they chose not to. So that inner circle that was enveloped in perfect love is now moved over to condition B. In condition B, you'll see that it's no longer a full circle. It's a broken circle. The broken circle represents humankind being in a place where they are never designed to be. And that is separated from God's love. You can see that with that separation, because sin separates, with that separation we find that we have loneliness, anxiety, restlessness, and emptiness. I like to summarize that with the deep ache in our hearts. This is the human condition, and writers and philosophers, theologians and artists have been trying to describe this ache that we carry. And they've used terms like the existential angst, the God-shaped vacuum, or the dark night of the soul. All phrases and language designed to somehow capture that place we live in apart from where we are created to live. That's a painful place, as you can imagine. That loneliness and emptiness is so strong that we won't stay there, which takes us to condition C. And in condition C, those gaps in that circle that represent us are now being filled with things I call plugs. And to name a few plugs, we could look at things like substances, work, material possessions, church, physical fitness, food, sports, entertainment, even relationships. Now, you might be asking, what's the difference between enjoying these things that God has given us versus a plug? And I would say the most basic response to that is, if it's a plug, there's a certain dependency on it that's not bringing me closer to how God designed for me to enjoy this particular area of His creation. It's typically taking me away from His perfect plan, and it's becoming a substitute. You've heard of the Old Testament idols Well, this is sort of our everyday equivalent of, I just call it a plug, because it's trying to cover up something that is so painful. And the trouble with plugs is external solutions never satisfy an internal need. Although we might try, eventually our plug no longer gives us the same relief. And then when that happens, we're required to use maybe another plug, or maybe even more of the same plug. And you can see how quickly we can become addicted to our plugs. Some people spend a whole lifetime chasing that perfect plug. I think relationships are particularly pursued plug in our culture and in many cultures over the centuries, really, because relationships are most closely representative of God's design. They give us that initial high, that thrill of a new relationship. But then when that relationship starts to require work and deeper commitment, and it doesn't give us that same relief, then we conclude this wasn't the right relationship. Or in other words, this plug no longer works, so I pursue another relationship to get that high again, and hopefully this one will last, but we know it won't. It's really hard to see someone go through life pursuing plugs. And one of the things that we find is really important to get a handle on in helping people who are pursuing plugs is the plug is designed to numb the pain. So when we ask people to consider how they're using the plug, we're asking them to let go of their numbing agent, and that's a hard thing to ask someone. And so what we find is people will stay very, very busy. And I call this the anesthesia of busyness. That way I don't have to feel what that condition B, emptiness, feels like. I can go, 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 and then collapse at the end of the day, get my brief rest, get up and start charging the next day. But I don't have time to pause, reflect, really take a look within, step back, and see what's really important. And I ask some people that I work with when they're putting in that 60, 70-hour work week, what would happen if you slowed down? And the ones who can be really honest would say, I don't like what I think would catch up to me. And so if I can stay busy enough and preoccupied enough, and that's where church comes in, because there's probably no place on earth where we can find ourselves being busy and being rewarded for it, but really not doing the work that God has called us to do. So what do we do with that? Some people will find that they're stuck there. But the good news is God doesn't leave us there. And here's where the concept of a God who is a jealous lover comes in. Jealousy is a hard thing to think about in terms of God, because it has such a negative connotation. It's such a negative aspect of human relationships. But with God, it's something very different. It's a jealousy that comes from a deep, deep love that's fighting for that love, that's not wanting to share it with anything else. And so God, at some point in our lives, says, I love you too much to see you compromised and sharing your deepest affections with these substitutes. And so I'm going to come after you with my perfect love. The book of Hosea in the Bible is a great example of that, as the jealous lover, God's jealous love for Israel, his people.